Hello everyone, I'm Professor Paul Carrier, Western Michigan University Thomas M. Cooley Law School, and I'm here to provide some information regarding the materials that we will be covering for Class 2 of our sales class. As you recall, and I'll cover this only briefly, last time we discussed the two basic types of negotiable instruments, notes and drafts. We brought up the names of the various parties. If it's a promissory note, it's a maker with a payee. If it is a draft and a check, it's a drawer and a payee, along with a drawee bank. We talked about the elements: in writing, signed, unconditional promise to pay, fixed amount, no extra baggage, no extra requirements, payable at a definite time, even if it's upon presentment for bearer paper, and payment to the order of as well. And so if you want to write those down for purposes of memorization, just take a look at the slides that accompany this presentation. Okay? And remember, if those elements are not met, you do not have a negotiable instrument, and you have to look at regular contract rules for something like an assignment. If I had a debt that was not a negotiable instrument and I assigned it to someone, we could use the assignment rules, and that person who's the assignee would stand in the shoes that I would have had were I to enforce. What we learn this week, next week, and the following weeks is that people who buy negotiable instruments have better protections as holders in due course. This week we talk about what a holder must be in order to be a holder in due course. Next week we'll talk about the extra protections that such people enjoy under Uniform Commercial Code rules. Also, last time we mentioned that some states and the federal government have put into place certain protections for consumers in cases where there would be a consumer product that was the subject of a promissory note. And there are certain restrictions to prevent the more unscrupulous lenders from taking advantage of common buyers of consumer products. This time, I asked you last week to treat this as another element, and that is the fact that the negotiable instrument, if it meets all the criteria discussed last week, it must also be negotiated. If it is bearer paper, it has to be turned over. Physical possession has to be given to another party, who then may or may not be a holder in due course. If it is a draft, it needs to be endorsed over as a check. Where you sign on the back, you're endorsing it over to someone else. Pay to the order of you. On the back you write you turn it over to someone else. That is a negotiation, and you don't get the same protections as a holder in due course, but the person to whom you transferred it, to whom you negotiated it, now may be entitled to those protections. In both cases, notes and drafts or checks, you will have a payee. If the payee's signature is forged, you do not ever have a proper negotiation. And so that element is not met. And people who hold documents of that ilk cannot be holders in due course. There may be other protections that such people can seek, but it will not be the ones we're talking about now and for the next few weeks as holders in due course. The specific requirements of becoming a holder in due course, where you start with having a negotiable instrument, and then it is negotiated, and that is done by other parties. When it comes to the party who wants to be treated as a holder in due course, there are elements that we cover today, and you will find them in UCC Article 3-302 and the Florida and/or Michigan counterparts. In subsection A1 deals with facial validity. On its face, does a draft, does a note look proper? Or are there big problems with it that should make it suspect? Because if it is suspect, then the person taking that may not qualify as a holder in due course. For example, the amount of money owed at the end of the promise, at the end of the contractual relationship, is not stated. That is a very big problem. Interest rates of 500%, that would be a big problem. Something written in crayon with an X and the picture of a clown on it may not be an appropriate promissory note. And so people who take those are very likely to find themselves failing in a request for protection as holders in due course. That's the facial. A sub 2 of 3302 covers things that are broader than just a facial test. And that would be, was there value? Not a gift, but was value transferred? Because we want to protect people for value. The amount of value depends on the negotiation, but it would be up to the amount stated on the instrument. Also, good faith. And we learned today that there are two components to good faith after a UCC revision in 1992, and of course, only in those states that have chosen to adopt such revisions. But there's a subjective standard. Were you acting in good faith? And that allows dumb but honest. If you're dumb but honest, you would still qualify in the old days as a possible holder in due course. That was changed now to include acting in a commercially reasonable manner, which is an objective standard. So you can't be dumb anymore. You have to act in a commercially reasonable manner and have to be acting in good faith. So stupid but honest no longer works. You've got to act in a commercially reasonable manner and take it honestly. And that is the new standard since 1992. Subsection C of that Article 3-302 contains certain exceptions. Situations where there are bulk transfers, for example, of these instruments, and it's cases where parties, because of their category, do not qualify as holders in due course. They may not be bad people. They may take the instruments honestly, but the law has decided not to extend protections to that group of people, that group of entities listed in subsection C. There is, with regard to today's materials, there's an extension or an expansion of holder in due course status that we see in the Heritage Bank. You see the 3302 criteria being mentioned and used, and the federal statutes have actually created an extra protection for negotiable instruments that go to public institutions such as banks or, for example, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And that would be that if there's some bizarre connection problem with a note, then that has to be documented, approved by the original making or the accepting body's board of directors, and then also kept in record form along with the original note so that it would be readily available, readily verifiable. And if those have not been met, then a federal government institution, for example, that takes one of these negotiable instruments will not lose its status because of some extra requirement that should have been but was not included in part of the, I'd call it the public record. Okay? Again, remember, treat a proper negotiation to a holder as an element. It's actually an element. No negotiation, no holder in due course status. It's got to be for value. It has to be in good faith. With regard to the U.S. Bank case, we had an example of a court trying to protect holders in due course that act relatively properly. There was nothing wrong with the note. There was nothing wrong in the process of looking it over and accepting it for a discount after being negotiated. And because of that, the U.S. Bank was protected as a holder in due course because there was nothing untoward facially or even in the background information that the U.S. Bank would have been responsible to know. And therefore, it was protected. Any kind, checks cashed, Inc. That was the primary case involved in one of the questions on the February of 2016 Florida bar exam. And what that covers is not facial problems with a note or a draft, but actually factual problems. Some smooth, big, nice-talking, smooth-talking business person with a $2,000 suit goes to a check cashing place to cash a $10,000 check at a ridiculous discount rate. Now, what important business person would take a check to a check cashing place and pay a huge fee rather than take it to his or her own bank? That is suspect. The court in that case found one of the smaller checks might have been okay, so the person who cashed it not only was acting in good faith, but it still might have been commercially reasonable. But for the larger check, that was just not happening. And so we found a problem with the objective test of the commercial reasonableness. In the Winter and Hirsch case, we see that people who take a note with facial problems, for example, blanks for the amount of capital to be paid off at the end, and or the potential of a completely usurious or overcharging interest rate might put somebody on notice and under the commercially reasonable objective standard, or even under the good faith subjective one, these parties will not be protected as holders in due course. With regard to Jones, a party who wanted to be a holder in due course apparently was helping the sales agent, the original seller who was having a note created, do the transaction. And so that attempted holder in due course knew the full backstory, and it was not particularly fair or clean. And so that attempted holder in due course failed. The Sullivan case, main thing with that, we measure the good faith test of an alleged holder in due course at the time of negotiation, not later. So if you buy on Monday and you learn bad things on Tuesday, you would still be protected as a holder in due course. Michiganders, I want to flag this as a potential Michigan bar exam question if the Michigan bar, in fact, does ask Article 3. The Dawdaw case, which I had you skim. There is an extra standard. In Michigan, there's the same objective and subjective standards from the Uniform Commercial Code and Michigan's adoption of it, which I believe is 443-302. And so in other words, just add a 44 in front of it. Please verify that to check that the number is correct. But it's been adopted with no changes. But there's that test. But somebody argued that there was a common law duty of further inquiry when things were a little strange. And so the question was, do we protect holders in due course and give that priority and not go too far? Or do we recognize a little bit of an extra duty in certain cases by adding this common law duty of good faith, reasonable inquiry? And the Michigan court ruled that there was this extra duty. So in Michigan, use the 3302 standards and also ask yourself whether or not there is a common law duty of good faith issue to address. Because in Michigan, perhaps in other states such as California, you'll find it there. Also, for everyone, there's this concept of somebody who is partially responsible in assisting the making of a bad negotiable instrument. The kind of thing that should not get protection. And that's clearly bad faith. So for example, if somebody sells a refrigerator with a pay over time contract, and that pay over time contract is awful and very against the consumer, and then takes that note around the block to another building run by that person's brother or sister-in-law, and that brother and sister-in-law had assisted in some way to creating the terms of that note, chances are you've got an involved party who wants to be a holder in due course, but was actually involved in the making of the note, and then should be imputed with the bad knowledge of what went on in the making of that note. I think there's a term, it's close connection. If the holder in due course, alleged holder in due course, has a close connection to the party who made the sale and then created the note, for example, and it's usually promissory notes, then that alleged holder in due course may have a guilty knowledge and may not pass the good faith test. Okay? With regard to the tests and the types of things that might lead to a problem of a close connection between the alleged holder in due course and the maker of the note who's actually trying to negotiate it to get away from it, you can see that there are 5, 6, or 7 different tests on page 488. Okay, I'll see you in class.